Today we'll be reading out of Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. This is the word of the Lord.
Praise be to God. You may have a seat. And good morning. It's great to be with you. If I hadn't had a chance to meet you yet, my name is Justin. And I'm so glad that you're here today on this rainy Sunday. As I said before earlier, today is a unique and special day. There are things that will happen today that will never happen again. And so we gather as a church to experience what those things are. And I'm glad you're in the room. We are in a series right now through a list of rhythms that we are looking at. And the big idea is that we realize that who we are and who we are becoming doesn't just happen on accident. That actually there are things that happen in a pattern and in a rhythm over time and consistency that actually make us who we are. And whether or not you know it or not, you're being currently formed and shaped by all of the things in your life that form these patterns and these rhythms. You're becoming a certain type of person. And it's not by accident or happenstance. And so we as a community have been looking at the rhythms that we think would best posture our community to, if we were to practice these over a period of time and then a pattern, would help us to be formed more by Jesus than the culture around us. And so one of the rhythms that we started looking at last week is the rhythm community, and we're going to continue to look at the rhythm of community today. Last week we looked at why community is so important, that it's not optional, actually, for Jesus followers. We talked about how friendship isn't necessarily the same thing as deep, authentic community, like that we might actually have friends, good friends even, but that doesn't automatically mean that we have deep and authentic community where we are being shaped and formed. And we also saw that we can't truly be formed into the likeness of Christ apart from the people of Christ. That it's actually in the family, it's in the community of faith that we are formed into people of faith. And so we can't skip that part of what this is. Community is absolutely, positively necessary for you and for me to grow in our spiritual journey. I want to take a look today at community and continue to unpack community. Last week, we spent a great deal of time talking about why community is important. Today, I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to talk about how. How do we do community? How do we get to the thing that we know is good for our souls? How do we get there? And so I want to look at that with you this morning. I'm going to dive right in. So the very first thing that we want to see about community today is that authentic community requires intentionality. Authentic community requires intentionality. Last week, we looked at this passage that we're looking at again this week in Acts chapter 2. In Acts chapter 2 is the story towards the tail end. It's the moment that we see the early church, the earliest church of Jesus' followers post-resurrection. And we see that they begin to organize themselves in a certain way. And we read that, Amanda just read Acts chapter 2, verse 42 to 47. And when I see that, I see such a beautiful picture of what authentic community really looks like. But here's the thing. That did not just happen on its own. There actually was an event, right? The resurrection of Christ. And there was an intentionality behind the followers, the people of God, gathering together. And the word that we looked at last week and the word that we'll, again, take a look at today is this word, devoted. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship. They were intentional about gathering together. And so what I want to say this morning is that real community doesn't happen by accident. It has to be practiced. Perhaps you in your life have experienced what I'm talking about. Deep, authentic community. Perhaps maybe you're coming into our environment here and maybe other environments that you've been in before, communities of faith, and you look around and you think, wow, they really have some deep, authentic community relationships. I wonder how I can get that. Well, let me just tell you that whatever you saw or felt or experienced did not happen on its own. It wasn't just like magic that all of a sudden people had deep-rooted and deep-grounded wells of community in their life. Community is the byproduct of commitment to one another. Community, as a result, takes time. It takes time and it takes intentionality. I remember growing up as a church kid, and I've been in pastoral ministry now for 20 years, but I also grew up in the church. And so my whole experience of my childhood and my young adulthood and now my middle age years are spent in the church. They are. I've seen just about every situation at this point, in the church world. And I used to think as a kid, I never knew anything different because, our family would bring us to church every time the door was open, we would be there. So, you guys, it's like we gather here on a Sunday, right? And we do our, Sunday and we gather. And when I was growing up, it was a Sunday morning. It was a Sunday evening, and I was always impressed because the pastor at our church, he preached a different message in the Sunday evening gathering. Like hours apart. That's insane to me. I don't know how that happened every week, but it did. Wow. I just think back on that time. And then Wednesday night was a very popular night. We would get together at the church that I grew up at for Bible studies for adults. There was activities for kids. And I realized something that has changed in the modern church world. And one of the reasons that we don't experience deep, authentic, deep wells of actual real community that goes beyond this gathering right here is because we don't spend enough time together anymore. Our world has changed. There's not a whole lot that we can do about that. But I'm just here to say that culture has changed. The way it was, the glory days are over. We're in a new frontier. We live in a new reality. And so one of the jobs of the pastor leader, and one of the struggles, I was just with a bunch of pastors this past Friday into Saturday at a conference. And, one of the struggles that pastors and leaders share all the time is, I don't know how to disciple the people that God has brought around me when I only get them for an hour on a Sunday morning every week. How does that happen? There was an old way where we just got more time together. And all I want to say to that is that the times may have changed, but something that will never change is the fact that you and I have been wired for deep, authentic community. And it will not happen by just coming to a Sunday gathering here on a Sunday morning for an hour. It won't. The thing that you're looking for or longing for, the relationships that you so deeply and desperately desire to have in your life that go beyond the surface level, will never, ever happen by just coming to a gathering like this over and over for 1 hour a week. They just won't. Tim Keller, one of my all-time heroes, pastor, author, theologian, has gone to be with Jesus. He's been gone for 3 years now. It's crazy to think that. He said this about community. Everyone says that they want community and deep friendship. However, because it takes accountability and commitment, we run the other way. This is largely my experience. I'm convinced that this statement is true at this point. I come across so many people in my journey, well-intentioned people, that love the idea of community. But they either don't know how to get it, authentic community, or when they find out what it takes, are not willing to actually step into it because it requires what he said there. Community requires accountability and commitment. And some of us are not ready for that. We want the benefits of what that gives us, community on authentic life-on-life relationships. We want all that. We want those residual effects. But we do not necessarily feel like we want to step into what it would take to get there. This does not happen overnight. I now know that. I remember looking back on my childhood now that the reason that there was such deep, authentic communities that were gathered in this little church that I grew up in, and families, and were not just like family friends, but they were doing life together and all these things, is because they actually intentionally put in the work. They put in the time. They made it a priority in their life. There are people that want the benefits of community, but they don't know how to get it. There are other people who have seen how to get it, but are not willing to step into it. It's sort of like a garden. Healthy community is sort of like a garden. It requires some things. It requires some planning, yes, but it also requires a consistent cultivation. Some of you might have heard me tell this story before, but a few years ago when we were still living in Keene, you're going to have to excuse me. I'm hoarse today. I've lost my voice. Did a lot of talking last night. I played drums in a band, and we had a show last night. And I was out pretty late, but also I was talking a whole lot. And this is what happens when you talk a lot. So you're just going to have to bear with me. I'm going to try to get this out. And then after today, I feel like I'm going to sleep for 1,000 years. A garden requires cultivation, and I remember our family was really well-intentioned. We had this idea, this thought. It would be really fun to have a family garden, right? So we planned it out, plotted it out. We got the seeds. Danielle's father helped us. He's got a green thumb and did gardening in his life. And so he helped us plan it out, plot it out. We find the spot in the backyard. I dig up the area that we're going to, I put some effort into this, where this is the year, friends, we are going to have a garden. And at the end, we're going to get tomatoes and snap peas and all the things, right? And that was a great, well-intentioned idea that we had, and we even planned it out. But turns out that gardens don't just grow and flourish on their own. And so, life gets busy and crazy in our case, And I just remember distinctly coming out one day and looking out and looking at where the garden was or trying to find it. And I noticed that the plot that I had cultivated up and put rows in. Now, because it hadn't been touched in maybe some weeks, looked just like the grass next to where I had just mowed the lawn, and it looked no different than the grass that it was next to. And so what happened there is that I was very well intentioned, and we did all the things, but then we just neglected it, and it literally grew nothing. I'll never forget it. Danielle's dad came out, he came visiting the grandkids and came to the house, and he walked out there, and it was a distinct moment I'll never forget. And he just, we walked out to the plot where it was, and he took a look at it, and there was a long pause for a second, and he said, well, that may be the worst garden I've ever seen. In a garden, you have to pull the weeds. In a community, you have to sometimes tend to the weeds. You have to deal with the things. You have to take time to water a garden, You have to take time to keep showing up to the garden, which is something I didn't do. And therefore it grew, it was overgrown. It looked no different than the rest of my lawn. Just like gardens that can be neglected, we can do the same thing in the garden of community. We can do the same thing to the community of faith. We can neglect it. And so one of my questions this morning as we think about this concept of cultivation, as we think about this concept of intentionality, like community is just not going to happen on its own. It's just, good intentions are not good enough when it comes to authentic community. And so intentionality is needed and necessary. And one of the questions I want to ask you today to think about in your life is, who is that community that is showing up for you right now, or that you're showing up for? Who are the people that you know well and know you well and are praying for you and you're praying for them? And who are the people that you're regularly sharing a meal with or needing to encourage because they're part of that sphere of authentic community in your life? And if you don't have that, maybe potentially you have good friendships in pockets, but it's not necessarily the same thing as authentic community at a local level, which is designed to shape you and to form you over time and space. Number two, when it comes to community, authentic community requires commitment through conflict. Authentic community requires a commitment through conflict. Notice I didn't say around, but through conflict. The Bible has a lot to say about conflict. Here's a couple verses just off the top. Romans chapter 12. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Colossians chapter 3, verse 13 says, bear with each other and forgive one another. I think there's a misunderstanding. Sometimes there can be a misunderstanding about conflict. I know at times when I think about conflict, I'm not always thinking about it in the right way. I'm slow to remember that conflict in and of itself is not a bad thing, right? There's probably most of us in this room just like, conflict, I don't like conflict. If you love conflict, I'd say there's some other things that we need to talk about. But generally speaking, conflict in a lot of our minds is this sign that something is broken. There's something wrong. It's a bad thing. And here's the reality. The reason that there's conflict is because there is something wrong. And at the heart of everybody is a sinful heart. and so there is something wrong. At a macro level, there's something very wrong. But I don't want you to think that just because conflict exists and will happen, that somehow conflict in and of itself is a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing to have healthy conflict in community, because it's the kind of thing that helps us to grow, and it's the kind of thing that should be expected if gone about in the right way. Anybody ever seen a rock tumbler? You know what a rock tumbler is? You take these rocks that sort of are jagged-edged rocks, and then you throw in some grit into this tumbler machine. You might have seen this before. And then what happens? Over time, the rocks are no longer, at the end of this process, they're no longer jagged. They're no longer rough, and they end up coming out and looking something like that, where they're smooth and they're shiny. But I just want to say that before that process happened, they went into a tumbler. Jagged edges bouncing up against each other, friction happening. But what comes out of that is smooth, polished stone. And I want to submit that that's what authentic community is often like. That God uses the friction in community life, the disagreements, the misunderstandings, the differences. Ooh, big one. He uses those things to shape us into something else, into something beautiful. And that is a picture of what the church is. It's a beautiful mess. One of the clearest pictures of healthy conflict in Scripture, because I said there's quite a few, but one of the biggest ones that I've seen is this conflict that arose between someone named Paul and another guy named Barnabas. Paul and Barnabas. And they famously had a very sharp disagreement. We don't know what it was about. We have no idea if it was little or small, but it was big enough for them to part ways. So we know they had a sharp disagreement. There was authentic community, and they decided that it would be best if they parted ways. And the sharp disagreement that they had was over this guy named John Mark, about what they were going to do with John Mark, or if they were going to take John Mark with them. And so, again, they had this disagreement. They parted ways. And you might think at first glance that it just seemed like a little bit of a failure there. Like it was an unresolved conflict that amounted to them going separate directions. Until you look at how God uses the story with Paul and Barnabas. And actually, God used the sharp disagreement between these two men to end up multiplying their efforts. See, they were already linked up together, and their job was to take the good news of the gospel, the good news of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, and to take it out into the world around them. They were going to do that together. And through a conflict, God sovereignly multiplied their efforts because now they both are going in two different directions with the same gospel message. Now, that might not be enough to convince you this morning that, it had a great ending, and it was. I want to show you what happened here. 2 Timothy chapter 4 is the story of how this little conflict is resolved. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 11, Paul is writing here. He says, "Get Mark." That's John Mark, the same one that he had the conflict with, or that they were arguing over. "Get Mark and bring him with you because he is helpful to me in ministry." What began as division ended in restoration. What began in division ended in restoration. And that is the beauty of the gospel. That is the beauty of grace. In God's hands, even the worst conflict can become a tool for your formation and a renewal that points to the reconciliation process that Jesus is in the business of doing in our world and in our lives. Do you see that he has some things for us to learn when it comes to conflict in community? You know, if you've been part of River Valley for, a hot minute, maybe more than 6 months, perhaps you've already had that moment or maybe moments where you have maybe felt misunderstood. Maybe you have had moments where you have felt that you've been overlooked. Maybe you've even had moments, dare I say it, where you have been frustrated. And I just want to say, you have all the permission in the world to experience those things. And I would even say that if you haven't experienced those things yet, get ready. Because you can't not experience some of those things unless you're in authentic, deep community with one another. These are normal things for us to experience. And the question isn't whether we'll experience it or not. It's really just about when will it happen. And then the question will be, how are we going to do that? How are we going to work through those sorts of things together? We're in a unique position right now. We're in a season of formation. We're in a season of as a church that's just getting started. I mean, and if you're new here today, you need to know that we have not been around for 50 years. We just started gathering on a Sunday gathering like this last September. Very new community. You are still getting to know one another. I'm still getting to know you. We're in a unique season too because we're also growing. And so now we have like a larger group of people. I mean, there was a whole crew of people in here before you guys. Just think about that as you look around. Pretty evenly matched. And yet God is doing something unique among us, and yet we're not fully like formed yet, and we actually don't know one another well because we're new. We're all new. And that's kind of nice in some ways, but I'll guarantee you, if you stick around long enough, and if you dig in hard enough, and if you walk into the path of community that we're going to talk about in a second, I guarantee you that at some point along the journey, you will feel some of those things that I just described. Frustration. You'll feel overlooked at times. You'll feel like that maybe like nobody knows you or wants to know you. You know, you'll get frustrated with me. All right? Like, it's okay. Like, there's permission. And the same could be true for me. You know, like, there's frustrations that arise in the community of faith. It's just part of the thing. But you know something? It's how God designed it. He wired each of us to be, to long for the deep, authentic community that only comes through the family of God in the family of faith. And so what I want to say this morning is conflict, just like the garden, conflict is often the crossroad where community either goes deeper or, on the other hand, it dies. It's one of those two. You have to make a choice, even as a person that's sort of like, if this is your church community, like you've got to determine right now, am I willing to step into the potential mess for the sake of authentic community, to be shaped and formed into the likeness of God? And it doesn't happen by just one day waking up and you got smooth stones just sitting there. You got to go into the rock tumbler. And that's what community looks like. And so the price of authentic community is often conflict, but I just want to say this, the reward of doing that is so much greater. It's so much deeper. The reward is deeper formation. And wait for it, authentic, deeper community comes out of those steps as well. So the question now is, how do we pursue this authentic community? You know, we know why it's important. We know that Jesus has said you can't do it without it. We know that there's a difference between having friends and having authentic community. And yet, how? How do I do that? How do I do this thing that I know is good for me? Well, in our text today, I think we don't have to go very far to find that community was a priority for the early church. Acts chapter 2, and we see that the early church established some rhythms of regular gathering together to be in one another's presence. They did this in both the temple, which was their larger equivalent of a Sunday gathering where they got together and they did corporate things. They worshiped together. They received the communion, which we're going to do today. You know, they had corporate times of singing and spiritual songs. They heard from the apostles and the apostles' teaching. A lot of what we do on a Sunday mirrors and mimics what we see when it says they attended the temple. And then it says that they also gathered in homes day by day. So they gathered in the temple, they gathered in homes. Now, I want to suggest to you that this was not just a routine for the early church. This was not a checkbox on a list of things that they needed to do in their week. Like Sunday, I checked the church box. And Monday, I'm getting ready to check the work box. And Tuesday, you know, I've got that class that I attend, and so therefore I check that box. And I got to get to the gym on this time, on this day, and so I check off this box. This is not how the early church viewed the gathering of the saints. It wasn't a checklist. It wasn't like a thing that they had to, divide and conquer their week with. This was life. Life for them was built around the community. And so, you and I, instead of looking at like a Sunday gathering like this as a checkbox item, begin to see yourself in a sacred rhythm that the early church also had. Consistently, they gathered so that they could be formed and shaped into the likeness of Jesus, and they knew that they couldn't do that without other people. We need each other. You know, we all have rhythms in our life. It's not that we've come up with a series and a couple ideas for you to try out to gain a better spiritual kind of experience. I was listening to a podcast this past week, and this woman on the podcast was really, really helpful. Maybe I'll send it out in the church email this week if you want to check it out. But she was just saying, you know, we've become so compartmentalized in our lives. You know, we've got our box over here for this. We've got our box for this. We do this here. We do this here, and this. And then what happens is that the church and the gathering of the saints and the rhythm of community just falls into another box, like every other box in our life. And what I'm here to tell you, and hopefully you can see on your own from Scripture, is that's just not how it was. It's just not how it was. Like, this was the whole box, and then all the other stuff fit into it. It's just a reworking of our current cultural day and age, where we are being programmed to believe that we can separate and parse out all these things. And our spiritual box is here, and I'm really working on that right now, my spiritual box. And over here is my, physical, I'm working on health, and I'm going to the gym, and I'm eating right, and I'm doing that. And over here is my relational box, and I'm spending time with these people. And I'm not saying those things are bad. I'm just telling you that when we look at community in the early church and the ways in which they gathered, the spiritual box that we have now put over here as a 21st century modern person was the whole enchilada. It was the whole thing, and everything else fit into that. And I think it's good for us to be reminded about that from their example today. A healthy church family makes the commitment of time for one another. One of the things I realized growing up is that those authentic communities, those deep wells of authentic community that happened in our church, they only happened because there was a common denominator. They had time. They had a lot of time. Spent a lot of time together. We've lost that. We don't have that anymore. I get you at best for an hour on a Sunday, less than that in terms of the teaching, but gathering together like this, we only get an hour together a week. I mean, are you serious? Like, that is a joke when it comes to what it takes to be formed into the likeness, the Christ likeness of Jesus and what he sees in the Scripture. So I don't know how we're going to do it, but I do know there are a couple things that we should probably think about doing differently if we want to grow into the things of God. There are a few modes of gathering here that we like to suggest for people to consider when it comes to this place. And if you're still considering, if you want a place like River Valley to be a community for you, I would say two things. I love what we do here. I love what happens on Sunday, but this is only part of it for us. This is only one half of what makes the formation of our gatherings mean something and actually have the room and the rhythm to form us, just like the water forms that rock. It takes time, and it takes rhythm and pattern. We gather on Sundays because this is a really good thing, and we just want to model right after Acts 2, but the other way that we gather is in our smaller groups of people that meet together throughout the week, in homes, around campfires, around different spaces called life groups. And our life groups are meant to help you take that next step into community. We're in the process of forming new groups right now. There are some groups that have started up. There are smaller little pockets of what I might call gospel communities. But there are options for you to take steps further and deeper into community. I want to encourage you today. We use this illustration here at River Valley Church to kind of like capture what this means for us. It's a pedal on a bike. And if you're learning to ride a bike, you lose the training wheels, and then what do you got to do? You got to pedal. 2 pedals to keep yourself upright. One of the pedals for us is the Sunday gathering. It's important. We want people to look at it as such. We want it to become a rhythm and a sacred pattern for you. And then the other pedal on the bike that we want you to consider is a smaller group of people. So like if this is the large gathering, we want you to have a small gathering. where we take what we've learned here on a Sunday, we bring it into community. This is not the best medium for us to just have like this open conversation, but actually in life groups, that's the place that we do get to talk and unpack and dive deeper together into relationships and spiritual growth. So I want to encourage you to check that out. You can go right on our website. There's a form on there that you can fill out if you're curious and interested in getting more involved with life groups. But we desire that for you. We desire for these two modes of gathering to be what we do here at River Valley Church. So let me know how we can help you take some further steps into that. Like I said, we're still forming some, and then we're going to take a little pause during the holidays, and then we're going to come back full force in January with some new groups and some new opportunities for you to get connected. In closing this morning, I want us to see that Acts chapter 2, this picture of the early church, it wasn't like this crazy, like something that they thought up, that they were even coming up with a strategy or a plan. It's just the life of devotion, intentionality, and commitment that came as a result of following Jesus. They realized they needed each other in order to get what presence. Imagine Jesus has been with them for, several years, and all of a sudden their leader, the one that they're following and didn't quite understand all the way, is now, he's now gone. He's left them, right? He's not with them anymore. I don't know about you, but when someone leaves me, I just sort of want to be around, I sort of want to be around the people that were around that other person, because it makes me feel like we have something in common, or there's some shared experience that we have, or there's a family member who's gone on to be with the Lord, and it just makes my heart feel good to be around those people that also experience the same thing in community life that I did. And so that's a picture also of what the church should look like for us. That we want to be together like this because it's in our togetherness that we actually experience the things of Jesus in a powerful way. And so I long for that for our church community as we continue to grow and to be shaped and to be formed into the greater likeness of Jesus Christ.